I'm delighted to announce our keynote and only speaker who's not a student. And I'm delighted to see that he's in the room because it sounds like he's had a nightmare journey getting here. So our keynote speaker today is Professor Iain Stewart from the University of Plymouth, who is the director of the Sustainable Earth Institute. So many of you will very likely recognise Iain as a presenter of many BBC shows. In fact, maybe Iain is the one that's inspired you to go into geoscience and choose the degree that you did. And some of those shows include Earth, The Power of the Planet, Volcano Live, and Rise of the Continents. So Iain specialises in the popular communication of geosciences, particularly with regard to earth science that's relevant to society. So he really kind of embodies the spirit of this conference. So we're delighted that Iain has returned this year to give the keynote speech for the second GASS conference. Thank you very much, Iain.
It is so nice to be here. Anyone who spent 5 hours on a train knows what I mean. So I just apologise for not having seen all your talks earlier on. I just caught the last three. Let me try and make up for it. So what I really want to talk about is the fact that I think that you guys are coming into science at one of the most exciting and important times in science. So we're geoscientists here, and so there's various images there of why geoscience is important to society. But the point that I really want to make is that in 2015, there were 3 global landmark policy frameworks presented to the world. There was the UN Sustainable Development Goals that we've heard at least once today about, which is an agenda of kind of social responsibility, social reform up to 2050. We had the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement for climate change, and we had the Sendai Framework for disaster risk reduction. What's interesting about all those things is that this is a gauntlet, a challenge thrown down to science. These are metric changes that have to happen on the planet if we want to be in a better place in 2050, and particularly in relation to certain things within the climate change area, potentially avoid existential threats to humanity over the forthcoming decades to centuries. And science and technology, I'm sure people in the room feel that that is absolutely crucial and that they should be part of it. But how do we actually operationalize that? How do we put that into practice? Because these are huge agendas that are kind of facing us. And what I'm going to argue for is that nothing short of a complete overhaul of the way we do science and organize science is going to be required, and that the communication of that is part of that fundamental overhaul. This is my place, this is Plymouth, but almost every university, if not every university, certainly in the UK, is now kind of galvanize the forces through training up their young scientists, young researchers to communicate what they do out there in the public. It's never been seen as more important. The universities want you to do it. Your research funders want you to do it. Your supervisors probably want you to do it, but they still want you to write those research papers, apply for those research grants. And you probably want to do it. So all the kind of forces are aligned to make science communication, public engagement, a really core skill of your kind of scientific toolkit that you move into. But the question really is that enough? We've been trying to communicate our science out there in the public for decades. Scientists have always been out there doing that. So what is it that's going to change and suddenly make, in terms of those big challenges ahead of us, it's suddenly going to make people listen to what the scientific evidence and the technological innovations are telling them and kind of change these directions of travel for society that are going to go into bad places. So like our place, we do media training for students. I do a master's level course on science communication. And so around the world, we're kind of training you ready for these challenges. But my view is we're training you in the wrong things. And that even goes for the ones that I do myself. So these are the challenges of making science public. This all stemmed from Royal Society got really worried. 2006, the government got very worried because we'd had a number of controversial science-related issues, and the government was saying, why are these scientists not out there talking to the public? So they asked them, Royal Society did a survey, and here was one of the questions they asked about, why do you think it's important to engage? And you'll notice that the biggest one is, third from the bottom, to ensure the public is better informed about science and technology. Over a third of people did that. And then if you look at some of the other big ones, to be accountable for that public responsibility, it's our moral responsibility to use public funds. We have to tell them what they're doing, to contribute to public debates, or down the bottom there, to raise awareness in some, either for geoscience or for science. And we've heard about the importance of STEM. So those were the reasons 10 years ago why people thought it was important, scientists thought it was important to communicate. If you zoomed up to the present day, the National Coordinating Centre of Public Engagement, which is based in Bristol, kind of set out the domains of public engagement, science communication in this way. 3 at the top left there, inspiring. Inspiring, involving and informing the public about research. And then the top right, consulting, actively listening to public views, concerns and insights. And then at the bottom, collaborating, working in partnership to solve problems, drawing on each other's expertise. Now, I was going to Menti this, but I thought it would be hassle, but I didn't know we were going to be Menti and crazy. But I'm going to ask you now, just for hands, who thinks, not what you're involved in, but who thinks the most important thing, the priority number one in science communication, public engagement, is inspiring? Who would say that? Okie dokie. Who would think it's consulting? And who would say it's collaborating? Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to come back to that later on. Because they were pretty evenly split. The biggest one was not the first one, and the consultant had about the third most, and then the collaborating one had the third most. And what that means is that it's different kind of science communication, which is fantastic. It's what I love about science communication. So if you're inspiring, then it's about going to science festivals and things like that. It's doing media, it's doing podcasts, it's doing radio, or try if you can do some television, public lectures and talks. Consulting, well, it might be involving citizen juries and public dialogues, or joining advisory groups and relating to policy-related aspects. And then if it's down the bottom there, well, citizen science is all the rage, but it's other things that are coming through, but co-production of research and knowledge, transfer of knowledge, mobilization. So turning knowledge into action, essentially, in that bottom right. The way that I see the science public kind of interface landscape is shown here, where I've put it on 2 axes. So along the bottom is, to what extent is the public participating in science? So bottom to the left, low, and to the right, high. And then on the vertical axis, what is the motivation of the scientist, of the researcher? What is your motivation for communicating? Down the lower part, it's driven by knowledge. It's driven by that wanting to tell people about your subject, the work you're doing. And then at the top, it's driven by what society is worried about, what society's concerns are. And you end up with a kind of weird and wonderful landscape, whereby down in the bottom left is the familiar territory. It's academic articles, so peer-reviewed papers, or conference presentations, arguably the bulk, 95% or so of what we would say is general or academic communication. But if you go to the top, then maybe some of you are involved in writing policy reports based on your research. If you come across the bottom corner as you go from the academic articles, well, you involve the public more by giving a public talk. They come in, they hear what you're saying, not really participating beyond them actually sitting there and asking some questions, but they're involved. And you might go all the way across to citizen science. Well, the citizen science and public are in there, but they're still generally addressing research questions. You've set up the research hypothesis, you want to collect the data, and that's their job, is to collect your data, and you then go and write research papers, etc. So it's a very complex area. I think there's a couple of places I just want to draw attention to. Probably the place that you're most public, the place where you're most comfortable in the public's arena is social media, Twitter. And that place, you're right out there, and it's whether you're a scientist or not, it's actually, in some cases, irrelevant. You may badge yourself scientist, you may just do it without even saying that. And the other one I want to highlight is television science, which I've put up in that area because most of the programs that I'm involved in actually come from program makers. I mean, about half of them I've pitched, but half of them are pitched by the program producers. And they're listening to the public. They're saying, what are the public interested in? Oh, they're really worried about this. Let's make a program on that. So it's been driven by the public's impetus about what they want to know. So understanding the public then becomes really critical. And there's a whole science. There's 30, 40 years of empirical data on how the public, how you communicate to the public, how you communicate risk, uncertainty, and all this bunch of stuff. And it's largely in the social sciences. And I'm going to take a nice, easy way into this, which is a CSIRO review report done a few years ago, 2014, which you can download. And the first thing that it does is it segments the public in the way that marketing people will segment the public, and the television when the makers will segment the public, communication specialists will segment the public. And I normally spend a bit of time in this, but I just want to highlight there are different publics out there. So from the far left, then, is kind of you guys, you're knowledgeable about the science, you're interested in science, you can have conversations about it, you kind of consume lots and lots of material about science. It's important for you. Then Mr. and Mrs. Average, less so interested in it, but still a little bit distant from it, maybe a little bit unfamiliar with some of the scientific discussions. In the middle there, a group that says, I really like science, I really like to hear about it, but when I go to places like science museums and science centres, and that's the biggest group that does so, that middle one, I don't understand it. I don't understand how it's conveyed to me. The I don't like science group is a group that actually says, I hate science. I've not really liked it at all. I've hated it ever since school or whenever. Some moment in time has made me fall out of love with any science. Now this group in here, Too Many Other Concerns, is a group that says, it's nothing to do with science. I'm just interested in other stuff. I'm interested in politics or music or art. I don't have time in my world for this science as well. And then there's finally another group, which is a small group in this one, which says, I don't need to know about science because I know how the planet works, or I know how the world works. I've got this alternative lens, paradigm that I use, religion or pseudoscience or whatever. So the first thing is, these are different audiences, and they demand different communication styles. And so one of the questions is, who are we trying to communicate to? The easiest one is the far left. It's us. But that's actually the one we spend most of our time communicating to. We communicate to ourselves. And that's because it's easiest to do. So when we have public talks, it's usually that group of people that come in, or it's Mr. and Mrs. Average, but it doesn't tend to be the ones across on the right-hand side. So one of the challenges that we have is, who are we wanting to reach? Is it okay to just continue to talk to essentially ourselves about these issues that we feel are really, really important? And my point at the start with the huge societal challenges is that society is made of at least these groups and probably more. So we do need to reach out into some of these other groups, and we need to think about to do it. How do we do that? The Australian study is really interesting because it also brings in the literature that sits beneath attitudes, which is about values and belief systems. What are the way that people make sense of the world? How did their set of personal ethics, personal values fit with this? And the way they do that is they ask value-laden questions to people. It's what social scientists will ask. So what we got there, the top left, the benefits of science and technology are greater than the harm. We depend too much on science, not enough on faith, bring in the religious. Science tends to benefit the rich more than the poor. Where do people scale themselves on a sliding scale in those questions? Because that's what is intrinsically within what their belief system is. And if you do that, then you find that this particular study segments the public into 4 value groups. And here they are, shown from left to right in increasing order of where science and technology is important and interesting. So science fans are the most pro-science. Science and technology is important for the world's problems. It's science and technology that's going to solve it. Science and technology is not going too fast. It's not too scary. This is what we need. The cautiously keen, yeah, science has got something. It's not the only answer. There's other things out there, but science and technology has got a role to play. The risk averse, science and technology is always turbulent. It's always changing our world. Why couldn't it just be the way it was? And then the least interested are those that are concerned about science and technology. Most of the world's problems are caused by science and technology, they'll say. Or the disengaged, those who are interested in other stuff. What I'm going to show you now is the way they play out across some of those value-laden questions. And the interesting thing, assuming that everyone in this room is green, is where green is. And the question I've got for you is, what is the interesting anomaly about us? There's something about green. Yeah. We're the freaks. I've never heard it expressed as well as that. We are the outliers. We are disconnected. So we tend to be on the extreme end. But more than that, we are detached from the other groups on the extreme end. So it doesn't matter what the questions are. You can ignore them. The point is that sometimes some of the issues, the B group will overlap with the C group. There's shared values between them on that issue. Sometimes it's D with C. Sometimes it's B with D. None of those groups overlap with us in terms of shared values on those issues. We are not normal. We're statistical outliers, but we assume that because we're experts, we're actually the most important of those groups. The Australian conclusions in terms of how we communicate science and technology are this. When information's complex, people make decisions based on their values and beliefs. That's their gut instinct. We do it all the time. It's too hard to be analysing every single question, every single issue. So we have to have a shortcut. We go to our instinct. It's down here in our stomach. It's not up in here in our head. We then look to confirm those attitudes and beliefs, no matter how weird and wonderful they are. And that's what the internet's for. You go into the internet, you search for it, and you realise, so the Flat Earth Society is back again, folks. And if you're a flat Earth, you won't take too long on the web to find articles about that the world is flat, right? You'll have gone through 99% of material that will told you it's not flat, but you're not looking at that. You're looking to reaffirm your values and beliefs. And so you reject anything that's counter to that. People most trust those whose values mirror their own. And that's the critical point of that previous slide, that trust is a cognitive shortcut. So I could go and, again, read up loads of stuff, say, on solar panels. Should I put a solar panel on my roof? Right, there's tons of literature, tons of material on the companies, on the technologies. Or I could go up the road and talk to Stan, because Stan's got solar panels. And Stan's sensible. He knows what he's talking about. Stan, should I put solar panels on? Yes. Right, I'm going to put solar panels on. And that's the problem of us being disconnected in terms of our shared values from these other groups, is that people won't do that cognitive shortcut with us. And then the final one then, or penultimate really one, is that attitudes that aren't formed by logic of facts aren't influenced by logical or factual arguments. That's the logic of that process. If people are making decisions based on their values and beliefs, they're not making it on factual information. The reason they don't like X or Y or Z is not because of the facts and information, it's because of their values. And we're disconnected from those values, and we don't need to be considered because we lie outside of that value range. So the overall conclusion of the Australian study, or the review really, so this is essentially what the social science literature is saying about these other groups. Public concerns about contentious science and technologies are almost never about science. And therefore, and this is the one that gets us, scientific information does little to influence those concerns. Now, we spend almost all our time constructing scientific information and communicating it. That's what we spend our undergraduate days doing and our postgraduate days. And when we get into academia, we assume that that is what we've got to communicate because that is our green world. Our job is to communicate as clearly as possible, without jargon and nice diagrams, scientific information. And it works for us. And it works for engineers and it works for planners. There's groups of society. But those other publics that we're going to maybe trying to reach about climate change or about disasters or about whatever, they're not that interested in scientific information, and it may be irrelevant to them. Certainly as opposed to some of these more important things. Let me give you an example of an area where we're finding this most acute. So I've been involved in Istanbul, looking at the earthquake threat. You may know earthquake. There's a real impending magnitude 7.4 plus earthquake that's going to be coming to Istanbul in the next decade or so. We've been expecting it for some time. And there's massive changes in the city as the city kind of accommodates this. knocking down old buildings and building up new ones. And in terms of the disaster, this is the Sendai Framework, which is one of those frameworks. Just to give you an idea, one of the things it's calling for is this a broader and more people-centered preventative approach. There's loads of science in Sendai. It's not that it's science has been thrown out, but it's saying you need to involve. The people who are going to die need to be involved in this. They need to participate in this science. The scientists go in and we leave. Those are the people who are there, going to there for the long term. That has meant really that a complete transformation in the way we do it, and it's similar in climate change and it's similar in many areas, that we need to get away from this top-down approach where the scientists advise local authorities and either indirectly or directly through, or indirectly through authorities or directly, we tell the public what they need to know. We give them the information that they need to know to change their behaviour. The people-centric approach, the public have these extra feedback loops where they're expected to be part of the process. And if you think about the complexity of the communication problem as simply the number of arrows, you'll see this is far more complicated than that. That's a nice, easy one. The trouble is it doesn't work. This one, we don't know if it works or not because we haven't had to go to try it. So what this paper, which is a critique of this, is really saying is that if authorities in Istanbul, for example, are going to bring in this new approach, then they're going to have to talk to residents, talk to people that live in the city, what are their concerns, what are they worried about, and in that way we have to become more competent communicators across the board and have these long-term dialogues, two-way things rather than these one-way knowledge transfers. So this is us, for example, this is an EU ITN project where I took a group of postdocs, geophysicists, geologists, paleontologists, into the back streets of Istanbul with a housing association from Osmedani, one of the affected areas, and a social scientist, and really kind of confronted them with the way that Ali there sees an earthquake. He sees an earthquake as entirely bad. There's nothing good in an earthquake. But half of those other people across there use earthquakes every day to image the marine offshore, or they'll study paleoseismology. Earthquakes are really exciting, a part of their world. Nothing is exciting about an earthquake to Ali and the people that live in his area. And that juxtaposition forced people to confront this. We went back and then had a workshop and we wrote it up. It's published, that paper. But half of those people hated that confrontation. And actually, about a third of them were absolutely galvanized by it and thinking, God, this is what we really need to do. I want to be helping Ali understand earthquakes. So let me go back to this, because I have said about an overhaul. So this is my plot of where the landscape of science communication. And for this bit, I'm going to borrow now from the business world, because the way that the business world sees communication is through the lens of marketing. And there's three main paradigms of marketing paradigms that have essentially set up the business world really from day one. The one that's mainly prevailed, certainly early on, is the make and sell. So the make and sell concentrates on the production process. It concentrates on the creating a product as cheaply and as well and as efficiently as you can, and getting it out the door and getting it to people. There isn't much marketing. It's essentially a sales team. The idea of the sales team is to convince people that they need the product that's been created by the company, by the production. And that, really up until the 1950s, was the way it was done. You just made stuff, you'd done it as cheaply as possible, and you got it out the door. I would argue that's where the academic communication world is. That we do our projects, we write our papers, and we send it out the door, and we drape it in lots and lots of communication skills to make it as sellable as possible to the public so that they'll want to buy it. And we talk about educating them, and we talk about increasing their awareness, because that completely continues that research process that we've generated. In the 1950s, a new approach comes to business: marketing, proper marketing, understanding the audience, understanding your customer. And the approach that comes in there is sense and respond. Think Mac or Apple. You understand your customer. When you discover your customer wants something else, you change your product. You're less bothered about the production line. People will accept a higher cost if you get it right for them. So this led to this thing about public engagement within the UK. Actually trying to be thinking, let's go and just interest the public in the science process. Now, to some extent, you think, well, actually, that's great, because this process of involving the public in science, if we take the sense and respond model into science, then we say that's great. If we just ask the public what they're interested in, then that'll be fine. We can listen to them where we can change science. And actually, maybe that's where a lot of science communication, this idea of dialogues. The trouble is, if I go into Istanbul and ask them what they want to do about earthquakes, they say nothing. Do you know why? Because terrorist bombs are going off. Because their friends are getting put into jail. Because there's a whole bunch of short-term concerns that dwarf my concerns as a geologist. Plus, there's probably some hydrologist going to go in next week telling them that flooding's a problem. Thankfully, they're not going to have a volcanologist. But you know what I'm getting at? We just list these things that they should be worried about, and they're worried about getting by in their day-to-day lives. So I think that's because but there is a problem here. Terrorist bombs, jails, whatever, will not kill 1 million people. The next Istanbul earthquake may well have death tolls in the hundreds of thousands. So how do you communicate something that's longer term, but actually, in some ways, higher priority? Climate change is a classic example of that. People are disconnected from it because it's so far away. From the business world, there's a new family of businesses that really have emerged in the last 2 decades. The sustainable businesses. These are businesses that have decided that social value is more important or of equal value to financial value. That by addressing issues of social responsibility within the business model, they actually can carry the customer. They can actually charge them more, but because their customer so identifies with their social context, they're willing to go that extra mile with them. Patagonia, Innocent, the drinks company, Unilever. These are companies that have got a huge social responsibility network and have got a business model where that is part of the money generation. It's not a loss, but it's the idea that actually not all of your value can be done by financial gain. And they call that guide and co-create. And I think the guide and co-create model is what we're going to need. The guide part says, look, we think we know what the trajectory of change needs to be, because we're pretty smart. This is us being science here. We know what the roadmap should be about climate change and about disasters. But we need to work with you guys, the customers, the at-risk public, all the time to be saying, is this the right thing? It's an iterative process back and forth. And that requires a whole completely different set of skills, communication skills, to the ones we teach now about journalistic things, about narrative and imagery and all the rest of it. These are the ones that require considerations of trust, transparency, and ethics. The ethical dimensions. In Istanbul, the threat of the earthquake is causing business developers, property developers, to push for the knocking down of old communities so they can build new fancy flats and retail outlets. That has been driven unconsciously by us raising the profile of earthquake risk in Istanbul. That is ethically questionable. And there's a whole load of these ethical issues that go right through the geosciences. Interdisciplinary. I don't just mean a geochemist walking down the corridor to work with a geophysicist. I mean working with anthropologists and social scientists and things like that to understand the totality, the holistic nature of these problems. Participatory. Inviting non-experts into the science that you're doing. Ideally at the start, when you're actually starting to create the science. What are the questions you're actually asking? Have you asked the community if that is the right questions? And are they involved in shaping the research? And then reflexive. You as an investigator actually thinking about the process you're involved in and thinking about your, again, maybe ethics, etc. But in thinking, is there indigenous and lay knowledge? Is there a place for other types of knowledge, for example, in the process? I don't think we teach any of that. Certainly not in the communication courses I know. And yet that is going to be part and parcel, a really critical part of the guide and co-create kind of modality. So my point really is that the make and sell and sense and respond are problematic because they're short term. The make and sell is short term, but it's short term us. We decide what we want to study. Research councils come out with a year or two things. We suddenly do it. Oh, we'll do that. A supervisor says, oh, I'd like someone to study this. We're in the decision-making process, and it's dependent on us. The sense and respond is the fickleness of the public. They're worried about stuff now, but maybe they're going to be worried about something different in 2 years' time. Plastic bags. Everyone's worried about plastic bags now. That's not an existential threat. Ocean acidification is an existential threat, but how do you get the public to worry about that? Well, that's a way of us. We need to try to breach through some of this. So the guide and co-create is about trying to do long-term. What I'm saying is complicated, but there are businesses now emerging that actually have models for how to do this. But there's one thing that every single one of those businesses have at their core if they have a guide and co-create model, and it's this: purpose. Purpose is a purpose-driven business. Purpose being a pursuit of an ambitious, clear, enduring, and overarching goal which is motivating. Now, I'm sure you personally have purpose, but actually, I don't think our institutions have purpose. They are on the short-term goals. It's the number of students you have to get in, it's getting some more money for research, etc. Universities are places of wisdom that should be looking 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead and saying, this is the roadmap we need to guide and we need to co-create. And really, for science communication to work properly, this sense of purpose and guide and co-create needs to infiltrate all the way through our institutions, from the top level all the way through down to the faculties and departments, so that you as a person starting to think about communication know exactly clearly what the trajectory that you have to follow. And if you don't like it, you move somewhere else, or if you buy into it, you get completely captivated by it, motivated by it. You bring in a whole bunch of students who are equally captivated and motivated. And some universities are doing that. UCL, just up the road, for example, its 3 strands is about social responsibility, really addressing some of these big questions. I just want to finish really with this thing, because my point really is that we are marketers. And what I mean by that is marketing is the interface between an organization and its audience, its market. If you think of universities, it's the scientists. What else is it? The scientists are the ones that are at that interface. So we are, whether we like it or not, the marketers in our institutions. And so if we're going to be effective, then we're going to have to get blooming good at it, because these are really big problems and existential problems. And anyone who doesn't think we're marketers, then have a look at that University of Birmingham, the way that they're selling. There actually is one for water crisis. We kind of know this, but it's very uncomfortable. But I think we need to acknowledge it, address it, and move into that sphere. Thank you very much.
Conference, thinking about attitudes to science. Do we have any questions for Iain?
Depressed you all too much, that's true.
Madeline, microphone's coming.
Hello, thank you very much, and thank you for sitting on the train for 5 hours.
Yes, thank you.
I've done it once or twice. I was wondering what you think the main barriers are to universities having a purpose. So what is UCL maybe doing, or what has it stumbled upon that other institutions haven't?
Well, you could say the same about why are some businesses not. I think it's those that are foresighted enough to do it. I think, in some ways, what I'm asking for science is science to do its job in a different way that it's always done. Academic freedom says you can study whatever you want. Society should not tell you that you should study that and not that. If it's true that we're facing existential threats in the next century or so, it is absolutely bonkers that there is not an organised way of addressing these things through science and technology. And in 80 years' time, if we suddenly find that, the oceans are completely bereft of life and through a process that we knew about now, and there wasn't a compulsion to study and address ocean acidification, people would say, what the hell were you doing? But that is a big thing, and I think universities balk at it a little bit. So the ones that I think are moving are ones that can see a market in it. It's kind of like your Unilevers. So I suspect UCL, I've not asked them about it, but I suspect they've decided if we pitch this right as this big motivating mission, this vision, we will get the best people in, staff, students, and we will end up doing good. We'll do public good, and bring up, it'll be great. I think a lot of them down the food chain are thinking about the bottom line. How can we marketing in a bad way, advertising? How can we market this? I think that's a bad way personally, but how can we get one above that. How can we suddenly get ahead? It's very, very short term. We need more students. We need a new course. What if we call that course such and such? Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think the problem's too big for that now. And I think the bigger global universities, the Columbias, the MITs, the Caltechs, and are starting to realise that in the same way that certain companies are starting to realise. And a lot of companies are not. They're still way behind the curve, I think. So I don't think our area is very different from business, but I think we can really learn from the best ones.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, at the back.
Thanks, Ian. There are other sorts of organisations as well. There are political organisations and there are governments, and those often have a purpose. So I don't know where they quite fit into that landscape. And then, of course, there are organisations like the Geological Society or the Geologist Association, which I would argue have purpose, have a much more clear sense of purpose than most companies or indeed most universities, but obviously can't do it on their own. So where do other sorts of institutions and their purposes fit into this?
It's absolutely true. And particularly NGOs especially, are almost defined on a purpose and then create everything around them. I think purpose can actually, you don't have to wait for an institution to do it. You can develop purpose at any level in an institution. So what I'm saying is that many of you in this audience, the very fact you're here probably has whether you've thought about it or not, you've got a sense of purpose. If, for example, the main purpose in many of these businesses is to create well-being, that's it. To improve the well-being of, and then it's whoever your market is. That's an interesting one. You can metric it. You can do these things. I think as you start to have organisations that are more complex, that common sense of purpose starts to be harder to do. The JOGSOC absolutely has been moving in that direction, and you've been really critical to do that. And I think that is the way we have to push on. A really clear thing about what is our sense. What are we wanting to create in the next 30, 40 years? What is geoscience going to contribute, and how is it going to contribute? What is a good geoscientist going to be? What kind of geoscientists do we want to have out there? Is it just people who can, map an area of 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres, for example, and identify muscovite and things like that? Or are we creating a different kind of scientist? A truly interdisciplinary scientist. One of the things that always, our scientists, we are incredibly interdisciplinary already. In my view about this, actually, is we're the perfectly placed because we're smart enough to just stretch out a little bit more and just take what we need from some of these other sciences, these social sciences, from marketing, and bring it into our world. I'm not saying that we suddenly lurch across to there. But I think basically most organisations, if you look at Paris, if you look at the SDGs, if you look at Sendai, need to really look themselves in the eye and say, what are we all about? Because literally, if 100 years from now there's no one around, then what is the point of all of our kind of mission statements, etc., if it's not about a fundamental sense of improving well-being on the planet?
Just kind of touching on when you were talking about marketing and image and things like that, I think a few of us were talking in the break earlier, and one of the things that I feel personally, like as an industry, like with petroleum in mind for me, we struggle with and causes a lot of the issues you spoke about is a real lack of connection for people between turning on the lights and how that actually happens. But in terms of informing people about what we do and these existential threats, how do you think we can reach out to groups that necessarily kind of almost vehemently don't like us, as in an example I can think of is like Gasland by Greenpeace. I feel like that is an organisation that really has the purpose to try and deal with these threats, but in some ways is unable to communicate with us about the science that we can apply with it. And how could we work with these companies that are great at marketing, but maybe in a way that is positive for us as scientists and them as an NGO and a movement?
I think the fundamental problem we have as scientists is we start in the wrong place, because we start with us. We start with our knowledge. I don't know how many years training there is in geoscience in this room. We've been trained up. We are the experts in what we do. So why would we not think that actually the communication starts with us? But actually that makes it really hard, because what do you communicate? Because you've got loads of stuff in your head. You've got loads of clever things you could communicate. The only way you know what to communicate is actually by listening to whoever you want to communicate and finding out about their world first, listening to them, and then saying, oh, well, actually, now that you mention that, I've got something I can say about that. We don't do that. We always start with us, and we assume we know what they want. So in answer to your question, we have to create fora whereby we can hear those voices, and we can shut up and listen. And this is what the students found really difficult in Istanbul. They're the expert we're talking about, and you're listening to some local person talk about earthquakes. But that is crucial. You have to listen to what they want. And then, when you know what they are saying they need, you then know what to communicate. And I think the reason why people's hackles come up about marketing is because they see it as advertising, they see these false, how do we give things that people don't want? I think that's what academia and research has been delivering to the public for about 50 years. It's stuff they actually don't necessarily want in terms of our output. So I think that the key thing that really I think is standing back, listening to what people want. Greenpeace are in the same problem we are. The vast majority of the public are apathetic and don't know what they're interested in. So Greenpeace has to take a very active advocacy thing that says, this is what we want. So they have to get them all excited. And across here is the other extreme in industry arguing for a different point. And it's because none of them are listening to people about what they're actually interested in.
Okay, some really interesting discussion points there, but wine is waiting.
I think it needs alcohol, to be honest. I think I've shocked everyone into silence now.
We still do have a couple of orders of business, though. Most importantly, the awards of the prizes. So I'm now going to hand over to Nick Pierpont.
Okay, well, as people said, there's a glass of wine or a couple of glasses of wine waiting for you. So I'm not going to. I don't want to hang around too long. But it's been a long and enthralling and fascinating day. So I just want to say that thank you to everybody here who's participated, who's listened, asked questions, and presented. And we've had we've had an opportunity to look at what the output of the early pioneers with the William Smith map outside, and we've had an opportunity to listen to you, the pioneers of today. So there's a really big thank you, and I'd just like to give you a big round of applause. Now it's we're coming to the awards session, and the way in which I think, having learnt from last year, what we'd like to do is just present the winner of the poster and best presentation, and have a quick photograph in here, and then for all the other, for everyone who has presented either a poster or a presentation, there is a token of our thanks to you. And we'd like to have a big collective photograph on the stairway, on the stairs, of everyone who's participated. So if we could do that afterwards. So the poster winners, and let me get this right. So we will mention, there's an honourable mention for two individuals, and it's Horea with the offshore Northwest Australia poster, and for Sarah with her poster on JET. But the winner is Riamat Bhatia, but I think she might have departed. Oh, sorry, you're here. Excellent. Sorry. I was looking for you over there. So for the best poster, we'd like to present this to you.
Well done. I didn't see it. I was supposed to. No, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And so for the talks, the presentations, and the two honourable mentions go to Sylvia and to Michael Steventon for that last presentation, but the winner is Sian Evans. So, So really, what I would just like to, for us to really to consider, what is the next step? Is it going to be GASS London 2019? You know, and to help us guide us with that kind of decision, what we were proposing to do is send out a survey monkey, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on the venue, on the nature of the the structure of the day, whether we ought to hold this event at this time of year. Should it be in London? Should it be elsewhere? So that will be coming through your via email in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. But I really would like to also thank the GSL for providing this venue to us, which has enabled us to host this event at a very, very reasonable price. And it's a partnership between the GA and the GSL. I'd also like to thank the sponsors, and the sponsors Elsevier, Shell, Terra Firma and the TMS, who most of whom supported us last year, and they've done it again this year. And also finally to the GA for their kind of commitment with this kind of event, and the support that we've had from the administrative staff in helping us out, in particular Sarah and Geraldine. And also this year we've enlisted the assistance of a couple of 3 helpers. There's been Liam, Ben and David from Royal Holloway and Imperial College, and I'd like to give them a round of applause because they've really helped us out. And so finally, I would like to wish you a kind of safe trip home. Hopefully we see you again next year, but you're really welcome to come and join us for a glass of wine in the Lower Library. So thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Oh, yes. I didn't see her. She was overseas, yeah. Oh, it had been mentioned at the outset. Oh, here we go, sorry.
Posters and presenters, please come up and get your little token of appreciation from the GA.